The refugee crisis pushes the European Union into uncertain territory. More and more people are stranded after Germany backtracks on the EU's open border policy. Where does this leave freedom of movement in Europe? And could this mean the end of the Schengen Treaty? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Bah Thibault. When Angela Merkel opened her country's borders to refugees less than 2 weeks ago, people rejoiced. Germany became a sanctuary for thousands of people fleeing war, many of whom had faced a hostile welcome elsewhere in Europe. But now the German government has admitted it can't cope. It introduced border controls on Sunday, effectively suspending the Schengen Agreement that allows free movement between European countries. German officials say the checks will be in place for at least a few weeks to help slow the influx of refugees. But that creates problems of its own. The UN's refugee agency has warned thousands of people will be left in legal limbo in Europe. And EU leaders are struggling to form a consensus as it becomes increasingly clear that current rules on asylum can't keep up with the crisis. Rob Reynolds has more from Munich.
Germany's decision to temporarily reimpose border controls and stop refugees from coming into this country from Austria is leading to a cascading effect across the European Union, as now Slovakia and the Czech Republic are joining Hungary in imposing border controls, checking for refugees at their borders as well. One of the great achievements of the European Union, that of open borders between member states, appears to be in jeopardy. Meanwhile, the Vice Chancellor of Germany, Sigmar Gabriel, in a letter to members of his Social Democratic Party, announced that Germany now expects up to 1 million refugees to enter this year. That's a significant upward revision from the 800,000 figure that had been widely bandied about. Now, Germany says it is simply full up at the moment and cannot handle any more refugees, and is begging other countries in the European Union to accept refugees on their own to ease some of the pressure on this country. I'm Rob Reynolds in Munich for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now for today's Inside Story are our guests in Brussels, Claude Moraes, member of the European Parliament. In Paris, we have Virginie Guiraudon, research professor at the Center for European Studies, and in Berlin, Thorsten Benner, co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute. Thank you all for joining us today on Inside Story. Thorsten, if I can begin with you, just help us understand first this German decision to control the borders. I mean, this is a dramatic U-turn from the previous open arms policy that Angela Merkel announced just a few weeks ago. Is this decision, Thorsten, to control the borders now a reaction, a short-term reaction to stem the flow of refugees, or do you think there's a political message here to the rest of Europe?
It's both. It's first of all a short-term reaction to give Germany some breathing space, because our capabilities and Austria's capabilities as well to receive refugees are simply full. That's the short-term effect. The longer-term political message is, one message is to Europe to say we need European solidarity. Germany and Austria need European solidarity to handle the refugee crisis together and not against one another. And there's also, I think, a broader message to the rest of the world, also to the people in the region, in the Arab region, that are considering perhaps coming to Europe, that what was portrayed as an open invitation by Angela Merkel, everybody can come to Germany on his or her own terms, that indeed has limits, and that not everybody will be able to choose to come to Germany.
But it almost seems inevitable that we would reach this point, Thorsten. We saw some dramatic scenes, of course, at the Munich train station over the weekend. Do you think that internal politics could be at play here also? Because more and more Germans, it seems, are expressing discontent with this decision to welcome these hundreds of thousands of refugees.
Of course, also domestic politics plays a role. I mean, domestic politics, first of all, facilitated the decision that Angela Merkel could say, we received the overflow of refugees from Hungary and Austria, and Germany shoulders a disproportionate burden. Germany is in a very exceptional situation. We're economically prosperous. We don't have a very strong right-wing political movement that is challenging the established parties. And we also have a media environment where the tabloid papers are pro-refugees, unlike in other European countries. And 60% of Germans have expressed their support for Angela Merkel's decision, but that support was in danger of eroding as you saw chaotic scenes at the train station, scenes where refugees weren't even registered before they were kind of distributed within Germany. The German government couldn't keep track of refugees anymore. There are lots of, reportedly, there's lots of refugees that have come recently that are not from crisis countries, but that jumped on the train and said, this is our one chance to get to Germany. So that's a reaction to that, and an increasingly concerned public, and also an increasingly concerned local government in Bavaria, which is the sister party of Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, the Christian Socialist Union. Because they were bearing the brunt of the refugee flow, they were getting increasingly angry.
Okay, let's bring in Virginie in Paris. Virginie Guiraudon, what's your view on this German decision? Do you think it's just a logistical measure, a short-term measure, as Thorsten in Berlin believes, or do you think this could be the norm from now on?
Well, just to respond to what was said, I think Angela Merkel at some point indeed played an internal politics game, and she was welcoming to refugees, and that made her softer, nicer, kinder to the German public. This perhaps was a short-term communications situation, but now clearly there's another story here. There's a two-level game. She's talking, Germany is reacting also to the fact that people are arriving more, and I don't think it's just a message to Europe. Germany is a big shot. They don't need to be pleading for solidarity to Hungary, but they're also talking to other regions in the world, including, of course, Gulf countries, but also some other countries who have not contributed. I'm thinking of Asia and Oceania. Everybody has to take a part of it. So on the one hand, she was very nice, and that was good for image domestically, but at this point, there's really a situation in Europe, but well beyond, that needs to be solved.
Do you believe, Virginie, that this German decision will help form and accelerate a common European policy?
Well, we've been talking about that, common European policy for many, many years now, and the meeting today in Brussels is a meeting of the ministers of interior, and that's what mostly the Schengen area and later the common European asylum, immigration, and external borders policy was about. It was mostly security and border measures, trying to keep people out, beyond the external border of Europe, mainly involving border guards, and now we see that that's not enough. That's the situation. They try diplomatic efforts, but the situation is such that it's probably going to call for more than just the ministers of interior, more than a technical solution and a short-term solution, as you yourself mentioned, to solve this crisis. So we need probably a summit of heads of state, not just of ministers of interior.
Sure. Claude Moraes in Brussels, where the ministers have been meeting, one of the key values, of course, of the European Union is this idea of the freedom of movement. So this decision to control the borders by Germany has effectively, I think you'll agree with me, led to a freeze of the Schengen Treaty. I mean, Germany has effectively exited temporarily from the Schengen system. Do you think, in your opinion, this will alter the fundamentals of the European project? Is this the beginning of the end of the Schengen Treaty?
I mean, I think that's a complete exaggeration, completely over the top. Schengen is a flexible instrument. It has been suspended many times. It was suspended recently between Germany and Denmark. It is flexible. In times of emergency, there is a code. It can be suspended. So all of this kind of over-the-top exaggeration is completely misplaced. What Germany has done has been completely predictable. I agree with the analysis of the first guest in what he said, which is that the goodwill of the German people, the leadership shown by Angela Merkel, has a certain sell-by date. Germany cannot lead on its own for this level of time with the resources that it has. It has to send a political message. And Schengen can be suspended for a temporary amount of time. The Germans have done it. Thomas de Maizière is a very smart man. He knows what he's doing. He did this on the eve of this Justice and Home Affairs Council, which is happening today. And that's a very clear political message to those reluctant countries, most of them round the European Union, not countries like Sweden, but countries who are opting out, countries who don't want to share the solidarity burden, and saying to them, look, Germany has 9 borders, it is Schengen, essentially, and we can do this. And it's also sending a message to those Eastern European and Central European countries who depend on Schengen as part of their economic health, that Germany can do this. And I think it was a very clear political message from de Maizière, and I think it was a good one. But of course they need to do it too, because they have resource problems in Germany, and I think it was the right thing to do for today's meeting.
You say, Claude, that it's an exaggeration to say that the Schengen Treaty is under threat today, but you would agree that there are a lot of questions now about Schengen, even in countries like France, who are proponents of the European Union. I mean, you have politicians in France, like the former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, saying today that if he were to be elected again, that he would revisit the idea of Schengen.
No, I think what is under threat is a version of Schengen. What is definitely under threat is the Dublin regulation. That is effectively dead. It's de facto not working. But Schengen as a concept is not dead. That's a complete exaggeration. Schengen may be amended, but when Sarkozy says this, you have to interpret what Sarkozy says. He often exaggerates. The point is, Schengen fundamentally exists, which is why it could be modified by the Germans in the way that it was so quickly and so effectively on one day yesterday.
Let's hear from Virginie in Paris.
It was done on the southern border.
Yeah, let's hear from Virginie in Paris. Virginie, do you agree that it's an exaggeration to say today that the Schengen Treaty is under threat?
Now, what Germany did yesterday has happened before many times, meaning a short-term reinstatement of internal borders. That happened for football matches, for anti-capitalism demonstrations in the past.
It happened in
but
the World
the situation
Cup,
is a little bit different today. The World Cup, all sorts of events. So it's actually, it's in the Borders Code that was adopted in 2006. It's a whole story. What I think is different here is indeed that we are in a political situation in Europe where indeed a lot of populist parties are going to try to exploit this. This has been happening for a while. But two things that people need to know where really on today. First of all, we will not reinstate borders, meaning lines. What happens with Schengen is actually we have border zones. People can be controlled 20 kilometers before and after the border. And some borders will not be controlled. The idea of just reinstating internal borders just means, in this case, for instance, controls at train stations. The second thing people need to know is Schengen is not just about internal border controls. It's an extended visa policy. There's a lot of other aspects, which means that even Germany has no interest in suspending Schengen.
And many of those aspects, by the way, and I deal with those every day here as chairman of the committee that deals with Schengen, are still existing. The Schengen information system, many of the security systems around Schengen are continuing as we speak around the European Union. So let's be very clear.
Sure.
Of course, this is a more profound situation than the World Cup. Yes, there is a more political situation, but Germany has calibrated it that way. It's sending a very clear message of desperation that Germany cannot take 800,000 and expect France with its 24,000 or Britain with its opt-out to be behaving in that way. Germany needs a solution that is an EU-wide solution. And yes, France has its political internal problems, but Germany will have those too if it continues in the way that it's doing. So this is a message, but of course it's more profound than what happened in the World Cup.
Okay.
Schengen is a very strong mechanism. Why? Why? Because Eastern European and other countries need Schengen for their economic benefit.
Well, let's bring in our guest in Berlin, Thorsten. Virginie mentioned the issue of populist politics today, and I think Germany is not immune to that. How important is this idea of Schengen to Germany today? Is Germany still as committed today to the idea of European integration?
Of course, Germany is fully committed, and Germany is also fully committed to Schengen. But as the Chancellor has warned, Schengen may not survive if we don't reform the so-called Dublin system, the way we receive refugees, asylum seekers at our external borders. So what Europe needs to do, in Germany's view, is to fortify its external borders, to come up, and all these measures have been discussed, to come up with a system where there'll be welcome centers, so-called hotspots, in the countries where refugees or migrants enter first. So that's Greece, that's Italy. In these countries, we need to set up these so-called hotspots, and then there needs to be a quota system that distributes the refugees, the asylum seekers across Europe. Eastern European countries need to, do their share, but also countries such as France and the UK will ultimately need to do their share. UK, I know, is outside. France, President Hollande announced to take in 12,000 refugees per year from Syria. But if the Germans talk about 1 million, that doesn't seem like an awful lot.
Let's look at the numbers precisely. These are the figures up to the end of August, which will have undoubtedly gone up in the last 2 weeks. Most of the refugees who make it to Europe are mainly arriving in 2 countries. More than 120,000 have landed in Italy this year and are still there. Nearly 260,000 people have arrived in Greece and take journeys north into other parts of Europe. From Greece, around 6,000 have gone on to Europe's poorest country, Bulgaria. Another 10,000 refugees have traveled to Macedonia, and 3,000 more are expected every day of the next few months. Moving up to Serbia, and more than 100,000 people have registered for asylum this year. Some of those have gone on to Hungary, 150,000 according to the UN, and then to Austria, where police say 21,000 people cross this weekend alone. Now, for many, the final destination is Germany. According to the UN's refugee agency, nearly 220,000 people were registered there by last month, and more are arriving every day. So as you can see, the numbers are uneven. Claude, in Brussels, there is discussion, of course, of setting up a quota. Do you think there will be agreement on this idea of quotas for these refugees? Because this is very controversial right now.
I'm very pessimistic about the meeting today. I think what is likely to happen is that there will be the beginning of a discussion on redistribution. I think it will be frustrated by some countries. 1 or 2 countries will opt out, of course. But I'm worried about the Central and Eastern European countries not playing their part, which is why this signal was sent by Germany. I'm worried about other big countries like France not coming up with significant numbers. I mean, 12,000, when Germany has done what it's done, when Sweden has done what it has done. But the real point is, look at what Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan are doing. That is the real point. But look, the European Union is not intending to take everyone. What the European Union is trying to do is to try and have a credible, organised, compassionate system for those who are now in the European Union. They can't be sent back. They can't go back either to Syria or Libya. So we need an organised system that begins today. I'm pessimistic that all of that will be decided today. I think another council meeting will probably happen.
Right.
But if we don't do it, we can't have the solutions of helping in the region either, which by the way, has to also happen, because once we get this mechanism up and running, which, by the way, will have to happen in the European Union, because these people are now here, as you said, they will keep coming. And once we have that decent system in place, we will have to also think about what we're doing in the region.
Sure.
So the European Union has to get this plan together.
Sure. Virginie, in Paris, this refugee crisis has certainly exposed some sharp cultural and political rifts within the EU. Do you think today that the European Union as a whole can overcome these rifts?
Well, we've had a few shocks. Of course, we've had the Euro crisis, and now we have this crisis. And, just to say that one of the largest, most prosperous economic zone cannot handle this compassionate, organized system means a lot. But let's just have a little historical moment here. Schengen started with a few countries. In 1995, it came into force. It didn't know that one day Hungary or Slovakia would somehow have a say in this. So, there's also, you have to understand that the European Union takes decisions and then slowly they're put into place and they're not necessarily adapted. The question is, can we reform this system now and indeed you know, we are facing domestic problems that are very short term. President Hollande, you have to know that there are regional elections at the end of the year in France, and you know, that's why Sarkozy is saying all these things. So you have short term, you have long term effects and short term politics. The mixture of these two is actually
what are going to be the long term effects?
Quite, good. Well, if you know, let's be optimistic here. There will be nothing happening today. There might not be an agreement, but I think at this point, everybody agrees, and especially if Germany is leading, that something has to be reformed and something has to be done. It's not going to happen today, but hopefully it's a better. You know, we saw with the euro crisis, there was some kind of solution. It's not perfect, but you know.
But that's the problem, though, isn't it? They always come up with these solutions that are not perfect. Isn't that the issue also? They come up with solutions, last-minute solutions very often, as was the case with the Greek debt crisis, solutions that are not perfect and issues that are going to arise again in a few years.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, I was trying to be optimistic, but you're right. I mean, you set up a system in many years ago, 20 years ago and more, and it doesn't really adapt. You know, it's no longer 6 countries, and somehow it's, you know, what has been proposed is more of the same for many years. The other thing, of course, is some of the solution is way more diplomatic or military, and there's nothing that we can do about that.
Claude, I think you want to add something to that.
Well, more than add, I'm involved in the meetings, and we did the relocation mechanism here today, so I know what is happening at the meeting today, and there will be something of a solution today. The relocation mechanism will be decided, a resettlement mechanism will be decided, but the numbers are still a kind of a joke. That's the point. We can't look at Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan in the eyes and say that this is sufficient, because countries like France, the United Kingdom and others are not pulling their weight yet, and that's the point of what Germany has done. Schengen will survive because free movement is critical for the European Union, and it is a flexible mechanism. It's got security built into it, and it is very important for the EU, so of course it will survive. And I think we will have a solution in the end. We did it in the 1990s with the former Yugoslavia, and we can do it again.
Okay, let's bring in Thorsten in Berlin. Thorsten, are you as optimistic as Claude in Brussels, or do you think, as many are increasingly suggesting now, that what we're going to see eventually is a fragmentation of EU countries into a patchwork of countries with different border rules?
Well, it's always easy to be pessimistic, but let me focus on the problem at hand. And Claude said something very important, that we do need to support the countries in the region, Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, that are bearing the brunt of the refugee flows. And we also need to be honest. It's very easy now to say we can deal with the refugees that are already in Europe or on the way to Europe. We will be able to deal with that, even if the numbers are not forthcoming today, and even if only a voluntary
quota is being agreed. You will be able to deal, you say, but as we've seen, there are a lot of divisions. Again, my question is, do you think European unity will remain intact after this?
Yeah, I think you know, the European project is stronger than the divisions of the day, and that you've seen.
But when you hear the Hungarian president, for instance, speak, you wonder really how strong this unity is.
Well, there's differences of opinion in a club of in a union of sovereign countries. That's normal. But even the Hungarian president, some of his Hungarian prime minister, that is, some of his views are totally out of step. That he's very anti-Muslim, and that he doesn't kind of care for the humane reception of refugees. But some of his other ideas that he actually also supports, that we have to go to the refugee camps in the region and make sure that the conditions become better. These are pretty mainstream European ideas, and I think you'll see a much greater investment, hopefully into Turkey, into Lebanon, in order to decrease the pull factor, or the push factors.
We will leave it there. Thank you so much for taking part. Virginie Guiraudon in Paris, Thorsten Benner, and also Claude Moraes. Thank you all for being on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can contact us by going to our program page on our website, aljazeera.com. You can also leave a comment on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly Bah Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.